Joe, I'm so
Tracy.
excited to get to hang out with you and introduce you to everybody.
It's great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm psyched to be here. You do
Psyched is one of my
good work.
favorite words.
I've been listening to your other podcast episodes, and they're great, fascinating, useful, heartening.
Good.
Yeah, really
I
good.
just wish that, you called me, oh gosh, I guess it's almost 2 years ago, 2 weeks before I was moving to Germany, saying, hey, I really want to get out on the sidewalk and listen with you guys. I'm like, well, I'll give you some names of some of our chapter leaders, but they were already like shutting down for the summer or not as active. Yeah. So
Yeah, I
I'm
still
really glad we
want to
get
do
to
it.
meet.
I'm still, the research for the book is done, but I'd still love to do it just to get a sense of how it works and what kind of response you get. It's such a great project.
We've got a very active New York chapter, so I'm excited to be here. So let's tell everyone about you. Can you give us a high level on your sort of, I sort of have this, I really admire writers because you take people's beautiful stories and turn them into things that come from the head and really make them go into people's hearts. So tell people about your writing career and who you've written for and why you write.
Thanks. Yeah, I write because I have no other skills. There's no other role for me in the world. That has become evident.
Don't burst my bubble.
Sorry. Yeah, I have no choice. It makes it a lot easier to do it professionally when you have no other options. I grew up in Boston. I am the child and sibling of funeral directors, who are very chatty people and really funny people and very social people. So a lot of my interests come from that. That was formative. I've lived in New York for about 10 years. I married a woman from New York, to the horror of my family and the horror of my friends.
Yeah, that's not cool for a Boston guy. So are you a Boston Red Sox fan, or are you going for the?
No, when people leave Boston, everyone there interprets it as a judgment on their choices. So it's taken very personally. I haven't been a Red Sox fan since they won the World Series in 2004, at which point I couldn't come up with a compelling reason to be a Red Sox fan anymore if they're actually going to win. If they weren't going to find new ways of shattering me emotionally every year, I just couldn't find room for it in my life. It was like rooting for Goldman Sachs or something at a certain point. But I still wear a Red Sox hat in New York, which is actually, I talk about this in the book, which is very interesting. Even though I'm not a Red Sox fan, I will wear a Red Sox hat in New York because it's my hometown and I like the hat. But the funny thing about it is that it gives strangers license to just start talking to me. They will just come right up to me and start talking to me. They feel they can trust me. They feel that I'm one of them. They feel that we have something in common right out of the gate. So like that hat basically gets us around some of the major impediments to getting people to talk to each other. And so it's always very puzzling to them when they're just like, "Did you see the game last night?" And I have no answer because I haven't followed the team in literally 17 years or something. So now they feel betrayed, confused, because I'm wearing it, but I'm not. Like I'm wearing a sign of the group, but I'm not really a member of the group in a way. It's made for some very interesting interactions, and it happens every single time I wear the hat out of the house. But anyways.
I love this. I think there's a whole host of human connection props. Puppies are props. When I move back to San Francisco, I'm going to for sure get a Dodgers hat now and just wear that around. I'm sure that'll invite all kinds of conversation. Kids are props. I never had more people come up and talk to me than when I had a little baby in my arms. Or when I was pregnant, having a pregnant belly is a prop. What else are props for human connection?
Really true. I mean, it doesn't take that much. It only takes a little bit. There's the kind of pessimistic reading of humans that we're like inherently xenophobic, but it really doesn't take that much for people to feel comfortable with you. The fact that people would feel comfortable walking up to me in the middle of the street in Manhattan because I'm wearing a certain hat is inspiring and heartening to me. Like, it's not that hard. It's not that hard for a total stranger to be like, "Oh yeah, we can get along," just because of this piece of fabric on my head. It's amazing. It's pretty cool. But yeah, to go back to your question, I've been a journalist for 20 years, mostly editing the newspapers and magazines. I've written for everybody, the Times, the New Yorker. I was an editor at Esquire for several years. I ran some magazines, I ran some newspapers, and I sold this book in 2018, I think. So since then, I've just been doing this, freelancing a little bit, but trying to write full time, which is where my heart is anyways. I love editing. I love other journalists. I love working on people's stuff, but the experience of doing this was just totally inspiring and totally fascinating and really satisfying. So I would like to continue doing it.
Why did you do it?
What's that?
Why'd you do it?
Why'd I do the book?
Yeah.
It's funny. So I dabble in screenwriting a little bit, and I won a fellowship a few years ago that was part of the Nantucket Film Festival. It was run by an organization called the Screenwriters Colony, and they pick 4 fellows per season or per year, I don't remember, for like comedy TV writing. And so I wrote a pilot, and they liked it, and they brought me on for this fellowship. It was 2 weeks, and you're in a house with 3 other writers and executives and producers and other writers, and like you're just learning the business and you're learning the stuff. And so basically what we did was work during the day, and then we just went out all night, every night. I mean, we were just going to like crazy rich people parties in Nantucket, and like the variety of crazy on display in Nantucket is like hysterically funny. It's like if you combined ordinary like rich people weirdness with like island rich people weirdness, and it supercharges into like a profoundly unusual form of weirdness. So we would go to all these parties at all these houses. And one night I was talking to the other writers, and I was saying, you know, journalism is a tough racket to be in now because the business is falling apart. Like the fundamentals of the market have collapsed. Yeah. The ad market collapsed. The subscription market collapsed. It's pretty bloody out there. It's pretty hard. But I was saying, you know, I wouldn't trade it for the world, because one of the skills it gave me from doing it for so long was the ability to talk to strangers. And so I was like, look, it's like, Tracy, it's like 4:00 in the morning when I'm giving this spiel, right? And we're getting a cab back to our house. And so I was like, look, I'll just talk to this cab driver. And I can almost promise that like we'll hear something interesting. There'll be something interesting here. And so I get into the cab and I start talking to the woman, and at that point she was in her late 60s, and she had this crazy story that wasn't hard to get to, about how she had these kind of vapid socialite parents who went in for this crazy socialite trend of binding their kids' calves. To give them like more shapely calves, like they had unsightly calves. They had to bind them in order to like make them attractive. So they crippled her. She had a limp. She still has a limp to this day. And so I was shocked by this, and I was like, well, what, you know, were they sorry? Did they do anything to like help you recover from this? Like, what did they do? And she goes, no, they didn't do anything. They made me take dancing lessons. And I said, why did they make you take dancing lessons? And her answer was, because they wanted to teach me to fall down more gracefully. So for me, that's such a great point about existence as a human in a lot of ways. Like falling down gracefully is kind of the name of the game in a way. But I loved it. And so I started thinking, you know, why don't I have these conversations more? Because I hadn't been doing it that much. You know, I had a young child. I had a demanding job. I was tired. I was overscheduled. And this part of my life that I used to do, you know, with some regularity had disappeared. So I started asking the question of why don't I do this anymore? And then I started kind of widening the lens and saying, why don't people in general talk to strangers? And wondering when they will, and wondering what happens when they do. And from there, I just went completely bonkers on research, and just drove myself crazy answering the question from every imaginable angle, from psychology, sociology, politics, gender, urban design, anything I could think of, you know, anthropology, how, you know, I studied how traditional societies dealt with strangers. I studied the evolution of hospitality towards strangers and how that became like a cornerstone of human civilization. I studied the formation of cities, how people came to live in cities, which, you know, after hundreds of thousands of years of being like kind of wary of strangers, humans are suddenly found themselves in a situation where they were willfully they were surrounding themselves with strangers. So why did that happen? Why didn't that lead to like a massive freakout? You know, it has in some cases, but for the most part, like, how is it possible that we're able to live in relative harmony in cities if we're supposed to be like such a profoundly xenophobic species, and we're supposed to have this default where we fear and hate strangers? But yeah, that's the long and short of it. But it went in a lot of different directions, and while I was doing it, I was gathering tips and insights into getting good at talking to strangers, and looking at what keeps us from doing it, and looking at ways around that, and trying all the stuff out myself. I did it all over New York. I went to Helsinki. I went to London. I took classes. I went to, I attended gatherings by organizations that facilitate these things. I did Urban Confessional. I really wanted to do Sidewalk Talk, and I promise I will. But I just did it, and I did it, and I did it, and I did it until I get good at it. And then, the book is kind of like a wide view of these issues we have with strangers, a review of the literature on why it's good for us, why it's good for society, and then like a pretty actionable guide to doing it yourself, to getting past the hesitation you might have about it or the anxiety you might have about it, and take advantage of something that's like a pretty powerful resource that's readily available.
So, did it improve your life?
No, it ruined it. No, I'm just kidding. It was great. Yeah, it was amazing, because what does it do, right? I mean, in a way, every time you speak to a stranger, if you learn to do it well, you get a little glimpse of what the life of another person is like, right? And that's huge. So even if I compliment you on your glasses, right? If I see you somewhere and I say, look, I know we're not supposed to talk to strangers on the subway, but I really like your glasses. My wife is looking for a new pair of glasses. Could you tell me where you got them? And you tell me a little bit about the glasses, you'll be giving me a tiny little glimmer of what it's like to be you, right? And so if I express curiosity and I'm not being aggressive and I'm not being creepy about it, maybe I ask a question and maybe you tell me a little bit more. And these kind of even short, meaningful conversations just give you a look at this other universe that is a person, right? A stranger. And it makes it really difficult for you to maintain the idea that strangers are simple or valueless or a threat or anything like that, right? It forces you to engage with the complexity of people you don't know. That's valuable all the time. It's especially valuable when you're talking to someone who's like of a different group than you are, because, as you know, we have a tendency to, lightly to heavily dehumanize people who are not in the same groups we are. That becomes more difficult to do when you routinely have interactions with people in which they give you a sense of their own complexity and their own individuality and their own lives. So for me, it's a doorway to wisdom. It becomes very difficult to dismiss a group of people when you've had good engagements with members of that group, even if it's a few people. Like I have a relative who goes to like a Vietnamese nail salon, and so has relationships with 3 Vietnamese women and cannot sing the praises of the Vietnamese people highly enough, based on 3 people. And that can go in a weird direction sometimes too, but that's all it really takes. Like, she would never be able to say negative things about the entirety of the Vietnamese people because those 3 people have taken residence in her brain in a way, right? It's like a check against prejudice. So say, for example, I'm like a liberal New Yorker. I've spent a lot of time in the Deep South and I've had a lot of good interactions with people, even though we disagree vehemently on some stuff. It makes it really hard for me to be like, F the South, because I always think of those people. I think of the people who are the exceptions to the rule, such as it is. I think of the fact that I connected with them, that I like them personally, that I think there's the potential of working together on something. Would it be a hot button issue? Probably not. But would it be something simpler that we can agree upon, we can talk about? Yeah, I think so. So having done this a lot, it's hard for me, and I tend toward pessimism anyways. It's hard for me to maintain that because I've had so many good interactions with people over the last couple of years as I did this. It keeps me from just being a bastard. Well,
we need more of that.
Right. But yeah, I don't want it to seem like I'm a Pollyanna or something, or that I was even naturally inclined to this necessarily. I mean, I'm always curious about people because it's my business. But I was surprised by the change that came over me from the experience of doing this, for sure. I think it's been, to have this sort of transformational experience past the age of 40, I think is pretty good. It shows the potential for growth over time.
So you're like this jaded journalist and writer and editor. You got a wife and a young kid. You're super busy, and yet listening to strangers has given you a transformational boost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
it was free. Well, except for all the research you did, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, research is the cost of books, the cost of phone calls, a little bit of travel. But yeah, what it did was my life had become much smaller. You have a kid or multiple kids?
Two boys.
Kids. Okay, so you know how that is. When you have a little kid, your life just like slams shut, and now it's you and like a very small number of people in a very intense situation. And it's great, and it's rich, and it's serendipitous in a lot of ways. But I definitely came to miss the randomness that I used to have before I was in such a structured life. So, for example, walking into a bar and chatting with a bartender, and this is something that happened, and just seeing what he's interested in and just letting him lead until he ended up telling me about the mating habits of the leopard slug, which is something that happened one time. It was fascinating, but I never even knew what a leopard slug was. So by having these interactions, it introduced a lot of serendipity. I mean, it gave me a chance to become a more empathetic person, a more curious person, certainly a better listener, because I definitely have a tendency to be kind of a loudmouth. So like becoming conscious of being domineering was really useful. But I just kept getting these little glimpses of other people's experiences, and it was great. And oftentimes it was hilariously funny, and sometimes it was really moving. But I think about those experiences a lot, and they definitely have colored the way I see the world. You know, I should say, because I was very busy at the time I was doing this, it didn't take that much time. I just had to resolve to do it. So even if you're super busy and you can't do what I used to love to do, which is just to hang out in bars or coffee shops, you can get little fixes of this in really interesting ways. You can talk to cashiers. You know, the experience of a cashier, I feel like it's really valuable for people to understand what it's like to be in a service job if they haven't done it themselves. It's really valuable to know what it feels like to be perceived as like a droid, you know, like a mechanism for facilitating exchanges, because they are. It's dehumanizing to work in service. It can be. It can definitely be hard. And so just because I didn't have a lot of time, I would talk to people in the supermarket. I would talk to people when I was getting coffee, and you just get a sense of what their lives were like. They would be excited to tell you just because no one cares about the barista. No one cares about the woman working at the supermarket, but their stories are great. I was in a particularly hellish Whole Foods in my neighborhood, which on a Sunday is just like, I wrote about this in the book, but it's like the last flight out of Casablanca in like 1940. It's the place is a nightmare, and it's frantic and it's crowded, and it's just like kind of upper class, upper middle class people in like gym clothes, on edge, like ready to kill each other to get the last pomegranate or whatever. And I love pomegranates, but I'm not willing to kill another person for one. So I was waiting in line, and I noticed this cashier, and she was really working it. Like, she was trying to joke with people. She was talking to people. And I could hear as I got up closer that she was funny, smart, you know, just like bantering, just running her mouth. And people were looking at her like she was a talking bird, right? It was like an emu had wandered in and was talking to them. And there was this mix of like confusion and light fear that these like kind of bourgeois bohemian types were greeting this woman with. So I was interested. I was interested in why she was doing that, and what kind of person she was that would be that chatty. And, you know, people like that are interesting to me. And so I got up there and I was like, you know, they should give you combat pay for working here on a Sunday. This place is a nightmare. And she was like, I always tell my boss that I want them to install a therapist in the back room. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what would you tell the therapist? And she was like, it's not what I would tell the therapist. It's what I would need the therapist to tell me. And I was like, well, what do you need the therapist to tell you? And she goes, these are not your friends, and this is not your fault. Which was really poignant and really beautifully said. But for someone who, I think if you weren't in the mindset of engaging with, you might be annoyed, you might be confused, you might be like, look, lady, I want to look at my phone. I don't want to have a conversation with you. But just by putting in that tiny little bit of effort and exercising a tiny bit of curiosity, she said something that I will never forget. It's a great line, you know, in a very short little line, she gives you a sense of like what it's like to be her, which seems to be a smart, extroverted, soulful person, and not a service droid, you know. And I did a lot of that. So that's stuff you can do all the time. You don't need to hang around. There are definitely great gains to be had by like putting time into this. And I did a lot of that too, just like hanging around the city, just observing things, watching people. But even when I was really busy, I was able to do this pretty extensively. And I found it super fruitful and challenging and fun and interesting.
This is so fun. I want to ask you more about the book, but the story about this woman just makes me want to ask this question, because you use the word serendipitous. Do you ever feel like there's a little bit of magic involved? Like maybe a stranger comes across your path that has just the right thing for you in that moment in time, and you're like, man, if I hadn't have done this, I wouldn't have gotten this little piece of magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's like Gillian Sandstrom, who's a psychologist at the University of Essex, who's great, who you should have on because she was
on last week.
Oh, great. Awesome. I love Gillian. She calls it a magic trick. She called it, you basically, you know, it's like a conjuring, in a way. It's taking raw material that you expect very little from. And again, this goes back to like our curious psychology about strangers. Like we don't expect much from strangers, and the reason is we have this tendency to assume that they're less intelligent than we are, or they don't have the same self-control, or they might actually be dangerous. All these things. We have a tendency to slightly dehumanize strangers. We also have a capacity to greatly dehumanize strangers under stress. But so you take something that you're not expecting a lot from, just like a face in the crowd, which, you know, when you live in a city, it means nothing to you. It really does. Like, it's hard to say, but a person in the city is an obstacle. It's like someone I need to get around in order to get to the subway. And I felt that way for a long time until I kind of learned to look in a different way. But you take this person and you ask simple questions, and like, it's remarkable what will come out, you know, and you're always pleasantly surprised because you expect nothing. You know, you're like, oh, it talks. Amazing. That's why everyone who does this is always just like, I'm always pleasantly surprised. It's because your expectations are so low for these interactions. Like, at worst, you expect to be murdered. At best, you expect a person that just doesn't have anything special to say. But when they do, you're kind of shocked by it. You get a taste of like a powerful intelligence, and you get a taste of like deep experience, and sometimes like a sense of soul out of people that were essentially, in your eyes, props for a very long time. So it really is like a magic trick. It's a conjuring. And Jillian talks about this too. It's like a superpower. When you learn how to do it, all of a sudden you have access to all these different worlds. And it really is. I mean, there's like I came upon a line in Jewish scripture that was, every person is a universe. So if you kill someone, you should consider that you've killed a universe. When you think of like the richness of someone's experience, and then all the people they know and their relationships and their hopes and their dreams, like there's a lot in a person. And when you talk to them, you get to travel to that little universe. You get to interact with it. And I think the effect in many ways is similar to travel. There's a great English historian by the name of Theodore Zeldin, who I spent some time with in Helsinki. He wanted to go to Finland to teach the Finns how to talk to strangers, because the Finns are really bad at talking to strangers. And Zeldin's whole thing is like, he organized this group called the Oxford Muse Foundation, which sets up these massive dinners where they pair strangers for like 2-hour intense conversations. I've done some of those. They're fantastic. But Zeldin, he's made it his life's mission to talk to as many strangers as he possibly can. He's in his 90s now, so he's racked up some pretty good numbers. And I remember he said, he was telling me why he did it, and he was like, I suppose I'm an explorer. And thinking of it that way was really useful framing for me, because you really are. I mean, you're exploring hidden corners of your world, but you're also in a way kind of exploring these universes that other people represent. And if you go about it, if you travel those worlds the way a good conscientious traveler would when you like go to another country or something, you're respectful, you're curious, you know, you don't have the answers, you know, you kind of maintain a light footprint. It can be super gratifying, and it can expand you. It can expand your perspective. It can make you smarter and wiser, and give you great stories and all this stuff. But it really is like, it's a form of exploration. And a lot of people who do this and advocate for this conceive of it in those terms, which makes them so much fun to hang out with, because they're just like, let me at them. You know, they're really interested in people. And once you find out that people really will repay that curiosity, it's great. It's so rewarding.
You're speaking my language, right? I'm like sitting here and I'm having like these little popcorn lightning bolts go off in me of all these just pleasant, amazing moments of connection with strangers, because I love the association that you just made. It really is like going on vacation to a foreign country. You literally get that same hit where your entire your brain is scrambled. You're like, oh my God, I just came back from a vacation, because nothing that you know about the world is the same. And that's super good for the brain.
Yeah.
Super good for the brain to have that kind of infusion of novelty all the time. I mean, when we go out on the sidewalk, people are lit up after. We go out for dinner, and they're just, the energy and electricity from all the listeners is just like, ooh, because we just got a free vacation, you know?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I want to get back to your book, though. I want to learn something from you, because you did all this juicy research that I'm so excited by. I want to learn, like, what were some of the things when you were researching, talking to strangers, that you were completely surprised by? Like pieces of research that you were surprised by and that really shaped how you show up now?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that I was telling someone else, I try out bits at parties, which I can now go to parties again, which is amazing. So I went to a party over the weekend, and
Lucky dog.
I like to pitch, right? So I'll pitch stuff and see what resonates with people. So I was over my friend's house, and I was saying there's a lot of really interesting work on hospitality. So you look at the long arc of humanity, in as much as we can really know it, like based on what we know. Humans were hunter-gatherers for a long time, and that meant that they were constantly moving. It meant that their groups were intermingling. Sometimes new people would join the group if there was enough food to sustain it. Sometimes they would go away, but they were basically like small societies. It would be 6 to 24 people is the estimate in a hunter-gatherer band. And so, that's just the way things were for a very long time. Probably 95% of our existence in the world has been as hunter-gatherers. And so all of a sudden, with the advent of agriculture, people start to settle down. Now you have the concept of owning land. You have the concept of living in the same place for a long time, which was never the way before. That's actually, people talk about property rights like there's some kind of natural law, but this, we went a long time without anyone believing that they owned land. It's kind of a crazy idea for traditional societies because you can't stay in the same place. You always have to move. So once people started farming, they settled down. They had little communities, right? Something else happened at that same time. So now you have sedentary villages, sedentary communities, but you also had this crazy phenomenon called the surplus male. And what the surplus male is, and this is according to work by an English archaeologist named Martin Jones, who studies deep DNA, like ancient DNA and population flows, ancient population flows. Stuff's great. Because people were farming instead of hunting as their subsistence, now men didn't really have anything to do anymore because there is evidence that there were female hunters, but for the most part, men did the hunting, women did gathering, and everyone pooled childcare. But now you have a bunch of guys who just don't have anything to do. Like they're not really hunting, they're not eating as much meat. They have no purpose. So these are the surplus males. So Jones's idea was that, and it's backed up from his study of ancient DNA, these men just left. They just started walking away. And previous to settlements, they wouldn't be able to get very far because you needed other people to live. You needed to pool your resources. But now that there were settlements, these men could walk until they found a settlement, right? So now you have like the traditional idea of what a stranger is, which is like someone no one knows appears in town. And so what do you need to do? You have to figure out if this person is going to be a threat, if they're going to be an agent of chaos. So you had this ambivalence, right? So you're in a little settlement. It's probably kind of boring. There's not a lot of people around and you're farming. Now this guy turns up. You have no idea who he is. Could you kill him? Yeah, you could kill him, but you don't know if there are a bunch of people who know him over the crest of the hill, right? Maybe they're going to come and wipe out your village. Maybe this is a trap. Maybe it's a spy. You have to be careful. You don't know what his intentions are. And because human psychology makes us wary of strangers and gives us this tendency to dehumanize them, you kind of assume that this guy's trouble, or he could be trouble. So Jones's idea is that the idea of the ritual of hospitality was a way of admitting the stranger into your settlement, because strangers are valuable. They know different things. They might know new farming techniques. They might have gifts to bring. They might just be fun to hang around with. We're attracted to strangers in that way, but we're also afraid of them. So hospitality reconciled the threat that a stranger could pose with the opportunity that they present. And so you would sit down and you would be face to face, and you'd be looking each other in the eye, and you would share food. Maybe there'd be an exchange of some kind of ornamental thing. But you'd get comfortable with each other. And once you're comfortable with each other, now you feel safe. Now you can have a real exchange. You can have a conversation. And then the guy stays the night and you're friendly and he goes somewhere else. Now, theoretically, if you go somewhere else, you might run into him and now he owes you a favor. Meanwhile, he goes to the next settlement and the same thing happens again. And in that way, all of a sudden social networks explode and humans radiate out with the speed that they never had before because these settlements became transit hubs for solitary men. This can lead to the spread of innovations. It can lead to a growing of relationships and all this good stuff. But Jones's idea was that this is the cornerstone of civilization. The fact that we were able to process strangers in this way and build relationships when our natural instinct is to be wary, we came up with a structure that allowed us to make these connections, and those connections became really valuable. So you look at the Greek world, when humans radiated out of Africa and kind of went across the Mediterranean, the Greek world lacked strong central institutions. It was chaotic, it was dangerous, the time of like classical Greece. So hospitality became everything. It became extremely important because you couldn't rely on police, you couldn't rely on government. All you could rely on for news and for protection and for the right of travel is the relationships that you would develop by being hospitable to strangers. So it's amazing because it's like the Bible. I mean, you read the Odyssey, and the Odyssey is all about hospitality. And again and again and again, someone will be inhospitable and someone else will be like, what are you, crazy? Like, why are you doing this? And it was so important that it became part of religion for the Greeks, whereas Zeus was the god of strangers, who would pretend to be a stranger to make sure that people were being hospitable, and then he would like turn them into birds if they weren't. A lot of people were turned into birds for violating the law of hospitality. I found so many of those stories. But I love that. I love that idea that the one of the more curious things about humans is that we are neophobic and neophilic at the same time. We're afraid of new things, but we love new things. And the thing that makes us open to new things and new ideas and new people is a feeling of safety and control. So when we feel out of control, we are neophobic generally. And if we can be made to feel comfortable, then we can really open ourselves up to new experiences, new ideas. I'm interested in pushing back on this pessimistic idea of people that they're like closed and clannish and tribal and xenophobic. They certainly can be, and they certainly have been, again and again and again in history, but we still have these capacities. We still have this curiosity to us, and that curiosity evolves for a reason. And the reason is because it's in our benefit to grow our social networks, to have friends, to make contacts. This is the thing that enabled the spread of humanity. So taking a really simple little thing like that was super interesting to me, because it's like, there hasn't been a ton about that. There's been a ton about what hospitality can represent, which is like the introduction of a new world, the mystery of a stranger, all that stuff. But like kind of combining the mythology and a lot of anthropological research into how traditional societies viewed hospitality, which is universal. It's not just Greece, it's all over the world. Like before the rise of strong institutions everywhere, like people were hospitable, and it wasn't necessarily passed from one culture to another. It was like a universal solution to the problem of strangers. But I love the idea that, that allowed humans to spread, and that allowed, it was a way to get comfortable with other people in a way that we could work together, we could grow our networks, and we can make it a little easier for ourselves in the world.
That is so cool. I'm totally geeking out. And what's really weird is that I spent 14 years in the hospitality industry, waiting tables and bartending. So yeah, it's totally in my DNA. And boy, do I have a mean story to so many stories. I mean, again, but what I'm hearing you say is it became sort of a part of our social order when there wasn't a centralized social order. Yeah, super cool.
Yeah.
I do have to ask, I got a galley of your book and took some initial looks through it, but haven't read the whole thing. But there seems to be this like idea. I mean, I think what I really love is that you're going further back in time, because it's almost like all the solutions to loneliness and disconnection, we're still only thinking about right now. I'm like, but we should probably go further back and really consider how was this a problem or not a problem? And when was it not a problem? And I'm just curious what thoughts you have about this sort of new sort of interest in loneliness after this pandemic, and certainly after some of the research about its impacts on our health.
Yeah, I mean, it's a disaster. It's a major social problem. It's a major personal problem. It leads to all sorts of terrible health outcomes. It's great to see people talking about it. It's great that it's not being seen as an admission of weakness, right? Because that's a big thing. I think with the previous generation, if you were like, I'm feeling lonely, like you weren't going to get a lot of sympathetic hearings out of that from like our hard-ass parents' generation, for sure, where like feelings were kind of verboten. The great thing is there's an interest in it. There's research being done on it. This is all great. People are beginning to realize, which I think what they knew intellectually, but they weren't feeling deep down, which is that we're a social species. We need to socialize in the way that we need food. We need it to stay sane. We need it to stay healthy. It's really important. And, it's different depending on what part of the world you're talking about. But in a lot of Western countries, there has been this kind of withdrawal from public life. And not public life in the sense of like running for office, but public life in the sense of interacting with strangers that live around you, being out in public, going to the movies, like Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, gets into that. We've very much withdrawn into our rooms, right? And partly it's because our entertainment options are so much better that you don't have to sit in the stoop to like amuse yourself anymore like previous generations of city dwellers did. And it's making us lonely. It's not great for us. Digital communication can be a bit of it can kind of augment your social diet, but it's not the same as doing it in person. So recognizing that is cool. For me, coming out of the coronavirus, coming out of the crisis, what I hope, and I mentioned this in the end of the book, I hope we see what we've lost. I think the opportunity that COVID presents us with is it took us very quickly to the conclusion that we were slowly moving towards anyways, which was 300 million individuals alone in rooms looking at screens, right? And I text all the time. I love email. Like I'm not a Luddite, but this is a process that was probably going to take another 10 to 15 years, and it happened instantaneously. So what we can do now is we can look at what our lives were like over the last year and say, what do we think of this? Do we want to go on like this? Is this what we want? Because this is where it's heading without question. Or do we want to try to do something else? So knowing what we know about a lot of the crises that are facing us right now, and even you can make the argument that political polarization, is an outcome of loneliness, of estrangement, of feeling disconnected and feeling like you don't belong to the world. For sure, you hear it every interview you read with someone who's like way out on the fringes. Now we can choose. And so what I wanted to do with the book is I wanted to make the case for that, make the case for the idea that it's natural, that we evolved because we were social, and now we're not social. So what do we want to do? The answer is pretty simple to our problems. And I wanted to give people tips on how to do it. So, I like I said, I did classes. I went through a lot of research and came up with some pretty good pointers for it. But for me, yeah, I think this is a really hard year for everybody. I think this is a tremendous opportunity to pause for a minute and reassess. And the great thing is, you talk to Jillian. Jillian is the master of this stuff, but there's a growing body of research that shows that even, minimal social interactions, which I think is what Jillian calls it, even little passing interactions can make you feel less lonely. It can make you feel happier. It can enhance a sense of well-being, but most importantly, it can enhance a sense of belonging. And I think, so many of our crises, not ecological crises, but almost every crisis we're facing right now is a crisis of belonging. I covered politics for a long time, so I've always, read a lot of poli-sci stuff. But again and again, you see like people feel that they don't belong. They feel that they're under attack. They feel that the world is taken away from them. They feel that the world doesn't take them seriously. All these things, and this happens for a lot of reasons. But knowing that can be maybe not cured, but certainly treated with a quick chat with your barista at Starbucks every morning, that you can feel like you belong to a place. With that small investment is a revelation. It's really important, and I think it can be. We need to connect with the people we love and the people we're close to. But there's a world of people who, if you talk to, like, it will really make you feel like you belong in the place where you live. It'll make the world seem smaller and friendlier and less chaotic. It's great. It's just super beneficial. On top of like the stuff that's just like learning interesting things. That aspect of it is fascinating, and I found it to be super powerful.
You just totally just got me all juiced up and excited for all the stuff that we do.
For sure,
I love what you just said, and I want to highlight it before we move into our final question. This idea, and I do have to tell a story because I just feel like telling one story.
Do it.
I love that what you just said. We evolved, and grew as a society because we became more social, and now we're becoming less social, and in a way that's directly leading to our harm.
Yeah, without question.
So it's not just personally that being connected is good for us, but it tends to lead to better innovation. And when we're lonely, it tends to lead to destruction, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah, yeah.
And I agree. I'm a big believer in common enemy intimacy. We love to get involved in fringy stuff when we're lonely and don't feel like we belong. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm getting this weird like Wi-Fi signal on it's weird. Anyway, I do have to tell you this funny story because I was in the hospitality industry, I'm super snobby. When I go into the same restaurant, if I've been there many times and you don't remember me anymore, I'm like done. And so I always frequent restaurants where I feel like it's a family. So I'll just name them. Morning Dew in San Francisco is my place. I know all the owner. I know his wife. I know their kid. They know what I eat. The Village Pub in Woodside has a file on me, so they know what I like to eat. So I'll come in and I can say, just bring me 3 courses with a half a glass of wine with each course, and I love that stuff. And I remember in college when I bartended, all of us waitstaff would go to the same bar after work with Willie. I don't think Willie's alive anymore, but I graduated from college and I hadn't been back in 6 years. And I go in with my current boyfriend to Willie's bar. Haven't been there in 6 years. He's down there very focused on the bar. And to me, he's like the real bartender. He walks over and I'm, of course, thinking I'm going to have to do the small talk. Do you remember me? Doesn't do that. He puts the coaster down. He says, dirty martini straight up with 3 olives. Like I had just been in last week.
The best.
And I'm like, wow.
Yeah. And think about what that does for you, too. It takes a chaotic, fast-changing environment like San Francisco, like any city, and it creates fixed points, right? So you can go back to that place and you know that you will be seen. They will recognize you. They will appreciate you. It's just like it kind of roots you in the world in a really important way. I mean, New York is a lot of that stuff, too. The guy at my bodega who, I always chat with, he's the guy in the corner. I say hi to him every day. If we're going to be promoting businesses, and if you come to New York anytime soon, we'll go. But Raoul's in Soho is my place. So okay. It's fascinating because you find sometimes that individual businesses have cultures. They have their own cultures. And sometimes the culture is no one talks to anyone. And sometimes the culture is it is open season. Raoul's is an absolute free-for-all. It's a great restaurant. It's been around for a really long time. But the culture of the place is there's no bubble. You don't have a bubble. If someone hears you say something and it's interesting to them, they're going to get involved. And it's going to be rowdy. And a lot of people who hang out there are work in TV and movies. And there's a lot of painters, artists go there, finance people. It's always a really good mix of people. But it's riotous. It's so fun. And it really is it's just a full contact sport. And it's my favorite place in New York. I'm going there in 2 weeks, actually. But I became really interested in places that were like that. So the place where I get coffee is a place called Cafe Martin in Brooklyn. And I came to know the owner from going there. But you go in there and you're just fair game. If you're reading a book that someone's interested in, you're not going to be reading that book for long. They're going to talk to you. It's the best. Yeah, it's great. So I just became interested in the formation of these microcultures.
Yeah.
In places like that where they are they're socially open, and you just get into, Raoul's is a special thing because I've just gotten into some crazy situations in that place. Talking to crazy people and fascinating people. And Owen Wilson hangs out in there sometimes. And it's just a real mix of people. And it's very democratic, everybody can talk to everyone else. It's just quintessentially New York and quintessentially kind of America in that way that I kind of like.
I like New York for that reason, though. I feel like there's so much room to be yourself in New York. Yeah. So fewer silos than the rest of the country and frankly, the world.
Yeah.
It's New York, for all you New Yorkers, one of my favorite cities. If there were just a little more nature, but I don't know.
There are parks.
People are the nature. There's parks. I heard the Boston accent. There's parks. Parks. Well, I know we're at time that we have this ritual that we do. Since we're going to take this conversation live on our podcast, right when I want to get the book title exactly right. The Power of Strangers, The Benefits of Connecting in a Suspicious World is coming out on July 13th.
Correct.
So we're going to make sure that the podcast episode goes live the week that your book baby gets born.
Awesome.
and get to shout it out. And it's going to have all kinds of tips. And, of course, we're going to read them because we love teaching people about how to do this stuff too. I like to geek out on all the psychological impediments to connecting that aren't the outward stuff, the real weird shit.
Yeah.
But, there's all these people that listen on sidewalks. So I'm going to hand off the mic. You get to speak to them. I'm out of the way. And you can say to them whatever you want, words of wisdom or a wish directly to those people as our closing question.
Yeah, I mean, don't lose your curiosity. Increasingly, I've become convinced that curiosity, like good faith curiosity, real, not morbid curiosity, but like genuine curiosity is, it's something that some people are born with, but it's something that other people can cultivate. I think it can leave us very easily. I think it needs to be exercised in order to remain strong. I think it needs to be your first response to the world. Anything that happens, if you can train yourself to say, like, I wonder why this person's saying that, instead of saying, like, the hell with this person for saying that. I think that's an enormously beneficial thing for individuals and for cultures. So for everyone who does sidewalk talk, and I hope to join those ranks soon enough, I commend you for this. This is super valuable work. It helps the people you're talking to. It helps you, and it helps you exercise that curiosity muscle. So if you can spread that gospel and get other people comfortable with this and get them out there in the chairs in the streets too, I hope you do, and I hope it keeps growing.
Spreading the gospel of curiosity. I love that, Joe. Thanks for being here with us, and congratulations on this book, baby. And I can't wait to get a couple beers in you and really hear that Boston accent come out sometime when I come visit.
Yeah, it comes out when I get loud, when I get loud and half in the bag, you'll hear it. But thanks so much. Right. Thanks for having me on. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you. You do such good work, so this has been great.
Thanks, Joe. Be well. And everyone, there's lots of information about Joe and his book in the show notes when the podcast comes out. So be sure and go check it out. If you actually want to learn how to be more curious, if you actually want to learn how to show up in the world in a different way, then pick up this book because it'll give you the 101. All right.
Great.